Welcome everyone to our next session, First Nations Leadership in Creative Arts and Society. And welcome back, I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And thank you also for that fantastic reel. I drive past the Nargi tree or go past it on a tram every day when I come into work, and I always pay my respects to that beautiful tree. This session will be led by the university's Wilin Centre for Indigenous Arts and Cultural Development, which we are incredibly privileged to have, located in the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. And they're in a new building just on South Bank Boulevard, one back from the corner of St. Kilda Road. And we're very happy to have them there, so prominent, part of one of our front doors. We have a few. The next session will have a focus on making. It's quite a different session than the last one where we were focusing on the digital. A focus on making is the stem of First Peoples culture, and the discussion will challenge the audience to shift the conversation away from the idea of cultural deficit to cultural thrivance. In doing so, it will underpin the importance of relational interactions and relational accountability, something that has been raised a couple of times by colleagues in the audience today. And it will do this in both a local context and, more importantly, within communities around the country, focusing on what we have here in Australia, which is so incredibly precious, with our First Nation colleagues, and thinking about how we honour that and take it forward. Our panel today is Dr. Evelyn Araluen Corr, who will be our facilitator. She's a lecturer in the Wilin Centre for Indigenous Arts and Culture, Indigenous Arts and Cultural Development. Professor Robyn Sloggett, who's the director of the Grimwade Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation. Sarah Bond, First Peoples Strategic Lead from Vic Screen. Sarah Nardine, co-founder, Turek and at Initiatives of Change Australia. And Tarek Ionis, the PVC for Indigenous, head of the Wilin Centre, and also our Associate Dean for Indigenous in the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. Panel, please come up. Thank you so much. So, over to you, Evelyn.
Jingiwala, hello. How are we all doing? I hope we all had a lovely lunch, or a walk, or a coffee, or whatever you did, or a yarn, whatever. Hello, my name is Evelyn, and it is an honour to be here as a guest on Boomerang Country, to be a guest on Kulin lands. I'm a Guri and Corri woman, so I'm from New South Wales. Through my father, we're from northern New South Wales, Bundjalung along the Clarence River. And then I have more kinship and family connections through my mother out to Bathurst, Wiradjuri country, and to Helensburgh on Ewan country. And then I sit in the very privileged position of having different forms of relationships and connections and educations from different mobs all throughout New South Wales. So I want to pay respects to the elders, the custodians, the sovereign continuing traditional owners of Boomerang Country and of the Kulin lands that I'm a guest here on. It always was and it always will be Aboriginal land, and I mean that in its firmest political and material sense, as well as in that deep cultural and spiritual sense. So I'm your facilitator, which may be a good or a bad idea, considering that I am brand new at Wilin. I'm not brand new at creative industries in a broader sense. I'm a writer. I'm also the co-editor of Overland Literary Journal, the co-convening editor of Post-Colonial Studies Journal, the director of the Institute of Post-Colonial Studies, and I think more importantly, I'm the daughter of public educators, so I've got that weird bureaucratic bone that sort of runs through everything. So it's an enormous privilege to be able to be here and to facilitate these conversations about First Nations leadership in creative arts and society. We've got an incredible panel sitting next to us, but given that this event is essentially led and hosted by the Wilin Centre, I thought before we go to the panel, I might ask Tiriki to tell the uninitiated what the Wilin Centre is, what does it try to do, that kind of stuff.
That's a good question, and once I've got that worked out, I'll let you know. But
Right.
The Wilin Centre has had many different and ever-changing identities, I think, throughout its existence. We're now in our 22nd year, rapidly approaching our 23rd. What the Wilin Centre is, I think, for me personally, and predominantly for our community, is a touch point, is a place of flux where a whole bunch of different stories come together. The Wilin Centre started its life as a space for representing and perhaps creating a space of refuge and greater safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students here at the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, or as it was in those days, just the VCA. But over time, we've changed. We've changed a lot. We've changed to a space that now offers a whole suite of academic programs, not just to our First Nations students, indeed not even to our First Nations students. I mean, certainly they're welcome to take our subjects, but more than this, we're interested in speaking to the space in between. This country, and certainly our government, is very good about talking about initiatives like closing the gap. And I would certainly admit there is a gap here, but perhaps not the gap that is being spoken about and seen. There is a gap that exists between so many of us in how we are able to speak to place and country and the deep, deep histories that have existed here and continue to exist here. Not just pre-invasion stories going back 65,000 years, but stories of resistance and resilience and, as Marie said, thrivance through creative and artistic practice here, specifically in this neighbourhood as well. And so I think a lot of what Wilin is a space where we try to make the invisible visible, and where I hope we can start to talk to other members of our broader community, black, white, brindle, wherever they come from, about ways in which we can, all of us, be a little bit more frustrated, perhaps a little bit cheesed off about what it is that we've missed out on in this space, and start talking about how we can redress that balance. Because the strength, the thrivance into which I was raised was never a weakness. It certainly wasn't a deficit, and I'm no one's victim. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, but I wouldn't mind a little bit of healthy jealousy every now and again, because I rather tend to think we've got it worked out. So when you say what is Wilin, that is Wilin. We are a space where the authority of First Nations voice comes through. We feel we make safer spaces, not by educating our Indigenous students on navigating the colony, but in helping all of us to learn more, to be able to celebrate, to find place for ourselves, and to, in turn, create spaces that are safer, I would contend, for us all.
You look to me as if I'm confirming that. You're the boss.
But you're in the chair, and
that's true. I'm the boss today. That is true. Yes.
Yeah, today.
Today. For the next hour. All right. So, listen. Instead of you've got people's bios somewhere on a piece of paper in your inbox. So instead of a conventional bio or pulling that into how each of our panellists would like to introduce themselves to each other, to us, but also to you as the audience. I've got a question here that I want to start us off with for everyone to reflect on. And that's, what are the strengths and legacies of labour, of culture and resistance that you sit yourself within and that you have been either working in or raised into? And Sarah Bond, we might start with you if that's all right.
Sure. Hi all. As you've read my bio, I just wanted to add a few more things before I answer that. We talked earlier, just responding a little bit around stuff that happened this morning, and we talked a little bit about the site at MAPCO, and I just wanted to bring a little bit more to my bio on top of that, and it begins with, there was a place called Alan's Lolly Factory that used to be down along the river, which is, so I was very familiar with South Bank, because I used to go and sit with Mum at Alan's Lolly Factory a lot when in the 70s. And at that time, when I'd travel into work with Mum, I remember she'd always point to the art centre and remind me of how we got down here. And that was through Uncle Harold Blair, bringing a lot of Aboriginal kids down from Queensland. And when she would talk to that, she would also point to the art centre and say, there used to be a circus there called Worth Circus. And that's also a significant place. I'm just trying to really build some story for you to understand how important Mapco site is to us, as me as a human being, but also as blackfellas, because Worth Circus was where Uncle Bill Onus first invited Uncle Harold Blair down in the 1930s, before Uncle Harold even came down here to go to Melbourne Conservatorium of Music. And Worth Circus is where Uncle Bill Onus would put on black corroborees, black cabarets, so they're probably the first cabarets. So there's always been a process of black storytelling since colonisation that has taken place on this site, and I'd like to see that continue in a significant uptake of what our community has been asking for, and that is for a rightful place in the Mapco precinct, a space which is led by us, is informed by our needs, and I think it's more than I'll talk to throughout this session. But I felt that just gave a bit of a context for me about we are tired of appearing like we come from a place of deficit. We are tired of asking for shit which should be our land back. It should be, Mapco should be approaching us. I think it's fantastic that Mapco have got an Indigenous garden. But again, it's flora and fauna. My brothers and sisters, we're tired of that. That's going back to an act in the 1930s and 40s. Give us some real stake of a claim into that space. I think it's fantastic you've had an Indigenous curator there. I think it's time you have a black fella in space there to talk about it and lend you the advice to be the relational person between our community to talk about the significance of creating a First Peoples-led space and an opportunity to support us in finding investment, whether that's through private funding. As we all know, government ain't got money at the moment, but we need these spaces. So our mob can practice their culture, because arts is not arts for us, it is culture. And we need our mob to have collaborative spaces so we can feed into the platforms that are going to be taking up, and that we're hoping the 600 million visitors that come through that place can start to invest back into a venue which is owned by us, so we can start to make some money on this land. I'll keep going later, but I just wanted to open with that.
So good, so good. Did you want to speak at all? I know you spoke a little bit about your childhood there, but just before we move to the next speaker, did you want to just speak at all to kind of, I guess, just, you know, who are the people in your life that have made you this passionate and have made you this accountable and responsible in sitting in your advocacy for your culture and your people?
Obviously, Uncle Harold Blair. My mum was a bit of a pin-up child for the Harold Blair project. She was one of the first mob of kids that came down in 1963 on the first TAA flight that brought all kids from Queensland down here. It was an opportunity to get them out of a situation where they were being the act of apartheid was being enforced on them as black kids. So Harold Blair and the good people that he got to meet through his relations at Melbourne Conservatorium of Music encouraged him with a holiday children's program. As I said, Mum was one of the first on there, so Mum came back here as soon as she turned 18, 3 days after the 1967 referendum. My mum came straight back down here, to a land of opportunities, to a land that she knew she could still practice her culture in, even though she's not on her country. She saw a way through the creative industries, even back in the 70s, as a way to still keep a connection to her culture, which is why a lot of us mob from interstate do work in this space that you fellas call creative industries, because it's a way for us to maintain practicing and being informed by our culture. So call it the arts, be what it is. So my mother, Uncle Harold Blair, your grandfather, you know, the many older sisters and brothers, which I'm looking at one right now, Rachel Mazza, and these leaders that I've always looked up to as a young woman growing up, and seeing how they speak out and own their space and advance opportunities for our mob just in their own creative practices, but also taking up that role of being leaders, always inspired me. And I think I've had the opportunity to observe and learn from the best. So that's many more names, but I'm sure I'll forget somebody if I keep going on.
And the beautiful thing about being black is that you get to just constantly live in the continuous opportunity of thanking and showing gratitude and respect to the people who raise us. So it's always a life's work to express our incredible gratitude and blessings. Thank you so much, Sarah. We're going to go to you now, Robyn. So the question is, what are some of the strengths and legacies of labour, culture or resistance that you sit in as you do your work and as you lead your collaborations and support work?
Okay, thanks. So I might contextualise this in a way I've never described myself before, right? I'm a settler community. And I really hate that word because I feel unsettled most of the time. It doesn't kind of sit right. And I want to take it back to, a story about when you were a kid. When you were about 3, we lived in South Blackburn, which was at the edge of the known universe at that point, right? It was new housing estates, right? And then it was bush. And you walked to kinder and there'd be snakes and it was a pretty great environment. There was an enormous, I guess it was a river red, I don't know, but enormous tree at the top of the street. And I must have been about 3 because we'd walked to kinder, 3, 4, and one day it was gone. And I remember walking past it and just this sense of doom and loss, and the thing that really unsettled me was who knew about this tree? Like, who did this tree know before I'm the person who's going to miss it? And I think a lot of Australians feel like that, but it's not articulated because of this deficit discussion that we get into, right? Like, you're on the okay side of it and you're on the deficit side and we're here to help, right? And I think both sides need help. So that's a kind of a little bit of, my creation story, I guess. But when we, just to add to that, when we have senior Indigenous knowledge holders down, and generally it's from remote communities, and we have a group that support us to make sure it's sustainable. So the grant model doesn't work, I've decided, ever. So we have this group of supporters that are just philanthropics, and they help us make sure that our programs are sustainable. Because once you have a partnership, it better survive, right? You don't do it for this year when the grant's in. Once you're committed, it's everyone's lifetime you're committed to. And we had dinners, and some of the philanthropists have said to me, I'm a bit nervous to talk to them because they were nervous about saying the wrong thing. Right? And then that holds up conversations as well. So you can see where the deficit sits, right? It sits this side of the equation. And it's particularly cogent to me, getting back to work and why I'm here, because I head up the Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation. So we work around preserving cultural material. Yeah. Really what we do, and we do a lot of work with community, really what we do is we're about ensuring culture can be nurtured, I guess, by the continuity of the cultural material that people have created in the past and that they want to survive so it can go to the next generation. And we were talking before about why that's a deficit too, right? So that these deficits have ebbs and flows all the way through, and they're on both sides, and they can be deep troughs sometimes, and sometimes they can be eddies that you get caught up in, but it's really important, I think, to out them. So for our students, we need them to be culturally literate because they're dealing with people's cultural identity, right? We can't afford for them to have the luxury of going, I'm a little bit shy to talk to that person, right? Because cultural literacy is not about how you feel, it's about your ability to work across a divide. So a critical part of dealing with cultural material conservation, getting the stuff into the lab, fixing it up, is who do you talk to, how do you talk to them, what if you say the wrong thing? Because people are really scared about that. So we also make sure in all our relationships and partnerships that we have a clause about we're going to make mistakes. When we make mistakes, we're going to talk about them. And then we're going to learn from that. And hopefully we don't make it again, but if we make it again, we're going to talk about it again. And that's been a really safe clause for us to have in everything we do, because then you can say, oh, I made a mistake. Sorry, let's talk about it. If you don't have that there, if you don't be really clear that you're going to make mistakes, I think people get caught up in, oh, I did the wrong thing, like I don't want to appear that I'm not sympathetic or, you know. So, yeah, that's kind of who I am and why, I hope it's why I'm here. I don't ask directly why I'm here. But...
That's why you're here.
Okay, good.
Well, you just spoke then, so I'll ask you same question. Come on.
Okay. And hello, everyone. I realise I've already spoken before. I'll quickly say hello again to those that don't know me. I think I know most people in the room, but my name's Tiriki Jonas. I'm a Yorta Yorta and Dja Dja Wurrung artist, academic and maker. This is not my traditional country here, but it is country that's held me for most of my 43 years. It's country upon which people have sung and danced and made art and poured their stories into this very firmament for thousands upon thousands of generations. And it really is only through the love, the care and the diplomacy that is shown to me, to us and my colleagues at Wilin and here at the faculty more broadly, that I'm able to do what I do and that we are able, I would contend, to do what we do. The videos that you saw at the start were from two great icons to whom I frequently am referring, both for their cultural authority, but for the care and love that they show me and my kin. Ngāwit, Professor Carolyn Briggs AM, and Auntie Di Kerr. Those were parts of some subjects we wrote during COVID, when we had to pivot to delivering content online all of a sudden. We managed, in a brief gap between lockdowns, to send out a videographer. I gave them a list of shots that we wanted. It's the most surreal experience I've had of kind of pseudo-directing in my life. But the beautiful thing was we were stuck at home. Right, we were stuck at home and there was nothing to do but kind of think about place and where we were. And we said, well, what exists within 5 kilometres of wherever we're sitting? What are the stories of place? We can't just turn our attention more broadly when it's so present and right there in front of our face. And so when I think about the legacies, this place and the stories and those who hold those stories of resilience and strength and thrivance have led me to here. And it's because it's not just me. This is a country that continues to hold and has held my family for multiple generations. My father, Lynn Onus, was an artist and painter here, starting out in the Dandenong Ranges, or beneath Corr, as it should be called. My grandfather, Bill, had a shop there. Sarah's already talked about my granddad. And it's their resistance and resilience and creativity through performative resistance that I think has been instilled in me so strongly. The fact that there are stories, again, just as Sarah said, that leach up through this country that oftentimes we don't know anything about. But yes, where Hamer Hall announced and in our stand was Worth's Olympia, a huge wooden open air circus with seating for thousands. A full retinue of elephants and animals that lived there full time. It burned down in the 50s. But prior to that, it was one of the few places in and around Naarm where young Aboriginal people could go to learn their language, dance their dances and sing their songs. At a time when it was illegal for Aboriginal people to engage in custom, to fraternise with other family members. The stages, particularly of Melbourne, folks, were chock full of Indigenous families maintaining and thriving in their culture. Because when you put it on a stage, you could rely on the hubris of the audiences in the colony to think, oh, well, it's just here for our enjoyment, so it's all fine. And that type of genius, I think, is extraordinary because it didn't just happen in a vacuum, and it wasn't just Aboriginal people doing it. It was the connections that were made on the wharves through the trade unions, people coming back from the wars, that turned places like Worth's Olympia, like the Princess Theatre, like Melbourne Workers Theatre, the New Theatre, into platforms of making and thrivance. It was the souvenir trade where people were taking and commodifying practices which had sat in families for thousands of generations and gaining a new form of independence. And that is the lineage that I sit in with great privilege. I grew up with this black privilege, and I'm at a point in my life now where I am privileged enough to be able to feel sorry for all the people that didn't get that. And I'm not talking about my other Indigenous brethren out there. I'm talking about everyone else who gets to sit on these lands and doesn't understand the strength of those stories that get poured into spaces. Because when you're black, you're brought up with these things, sometimes they're whispered to you. Or they might be a little bit sneaky. You know. Let's talk about where the name for Moomba comes from. But there are so many people that walk in this place that don't have access to that story. And I think that's a travesty. And I think everyone should be able to ask themselves what it is that they've missed out on in this space and what can be done to redress that balance. Not to be extractive, but to be able to amplify and celebrate. And so to come back to my previous answer very quickly, I think that is also very much the point of what we do at the Wilin Centre, and that is our driving force, our raison d'etre, if you will. We've been incredibly fortunate with the way that we are embraced here within our faculty and within the university. And we love that strength. We've worked hard to break down some of those artificially imposed barriers. But I take incredible pride when I hear the sincerity with which our extraordinary Dean, Marie Sierra, speaks about the place that we hold together. And I love that, and I get excited about what we're going to do together. Those are the sorts of legacies that I want to talk about. Legacies that are very much of refusal and self-determination, but not ones of exclusion. They're just ones that refuse to accept the world for what it was and instead dare to dream for what it might be.
That's a good soundbite. Sarah Narden, would you mind answering the same question? So just to remind you, so what are these contexts of labour, culture and resistance that you sit and work in?
Thank you, Evelyn. Yes, just going back to what Robyn did with a little context, also with Dutch heritage from father, settler from my mother. I've lived in Bunwarang and Wurundjeri country all my life, and I have been yearning for what Tiriki calls the cultural thrivance. I've always experienced the deficit lens, and I'm a recovering architect. I went to the University of Melbourne just down the road. I had one lesson on a bark hut. We had thousands of European architecture lessons, and for 30 years I've been training myself to stop the deadlines, stop the schedules, and sit and have a yarn and learn from this incredible oldest living culture in the world. You know, it's such a privilege to be asked by this panel to sit here. I am fortunately a creative enabler now to turn that deficit lens into a resource lens. So looking at where to close the gap issues that we inflicted as a colonial project, and how do we take back that the idea of placemaking. And it's really exciting. I have worked with Uncle Shane Charles on a program called Turak, and it's from Turak, which we have a place, Initiatives of Change in Turak, that was gifted to us in 1956. At the time, they are allies of about 70 years, so they've been creative enablers. They helped actually Harold Blair get to Switzerland after he came back from the US. He had a lot of talent to take to Europe, helped Auntie Marg Tucker write her book about If Everybody Cared, the first autobiography from a Stolen Generations woman. And I'd also like to acknowledge Bianca Easton in the audience, who is a Bunwarang weaver that we now work with, and we look at how we decolonise our collaboration. So how do we create the equity, the opportunity that we see to deepen our conversations and create a legacy that is filling the gap between the deficit and what I call a resource. So, Thank you. Thank you for the question.
you. So to kind of move into the practical aspects of this discussion, okay. Now, I'm sure everybody on this panel, and I know certainly for the mob here that you would be quite accustomed to the experience of being pulled into different things and asked to fix problems, to fix colonial problems, to fix diversity problems, to fix problems of educational practice and inclusion and stuff. We're always asked too late to be involved to resolve something that wasn't our fault and that was usually the product of a particular system that we were engineered to be excluded from. So often when we're asked to give our expertise, it's always framed, it's the deficit situation and we're here to fix the deficit. That wouldn't have even existed as a problem if you'd spoken to us in the first place, right? The whole fatigue, I think, especially thinking of the last kind of 24 months and then 240 years, of that form of knowledge sharing and consultation, I think has been weighing particularly heavily on mob and also on the allies that are often pulled in to license or to make certain spaces more accessible to people who don't have the relationships that will allow them to go into those spaces, etc., etc., etc. The mob in the room know what I'm talking about, and people who've worked closely with mob know what I'm talking about. So when I ask the question of what do you want to share with this room about your experiences and your expertise when it comes to First Nations making, but also making the context in which First Nations making is possible, what I would like you to think about is not this deficit situation of how do we put out the fires that we didn't light, but rather what's some of the wisdom and the knowings and the experiences that you have had that have led you to understand how we stop problems before they're problems and how we build strengths so they can become things that aren't even what we could have possibly imagined. So thinking of things that you see as being particular sites of opportunity. I hate using that bureaucratic corporate language, the worm that's in my head that I'll never get rid of. Thank you, Mum and Dad, and every single AECG meeting I ever sat in. Why don't we start, Sarah B, again with you. There was a phrase when we were having these yarns about this discussion and this panel, you used this phrase about wanting to put, this project of putting value in cultural safety. So if I could slightly lead you in your response a little bit, would you mind speaking to us about value and cultural safety and some of the work that you've been doing, not just with Vic Screen, but some of the other, spaces and projects you've been working in throughout your life?
Sure, sis. Now that you've mentioned that, just to let you know, I'm currently working at Vic Screen. I do have a permanent job with Creative Victoria First Peoples team, so some of the stuff I'll be talking about crosses against is experiences and knowledge and ways of working that I've learnt from both those roles across those organisations, which kind of funnel into the same points I'm going to make. Vic Screen is now involved, have engaged me to begin the early strategic work in creating a 10-year strategy to skill up mob down here in how to use technology to tell their stories, to talk to their countries, to use their authority of storytellers from this country to respond to the shit diatribe that we were all part of last year and that we're still hurt from, and we haven't all found a way to respond to that. And I think film, media, digital games, virtual reality is going to be a way our generations in the future are going to use as a dominant communication tool. So I'm very excited with the consultation process that I'm currently undertaking with our First Peoples sector through roundtables, one-on-one consultations, forums that have been taking place, and just hearing that there's a real hunger from our mob, and there's a real thrivance, because I guess in the old days film and television was about having tools and equipment, but we all got phones now. We all got accessibility to making a film and telling your story through media. So that's an exciting, accessible a fact, which is it makes working with our kids and our young people and skilling them up, and our storytellers, not just our kids, but our mob that are looking to transition across into using screen as a way of responding or telling yarns is accessible and available, and that makes the immediacy of growing our sector achievable. I value also that consultation process, which is always led and advised by, it's not just me as the black public servant. We will no longer be the dole the darkie. We will be informed by our community, and when we go and take these roles in government, we will ensure that we bring in the right voices, the custodianship of authority to advise us as black public servants in how we undertake our role and how to drive our communications and how we consult with our sector. I have a big screen. I have a First Peoples working group, of which Tiriki is part of. In my time at Creative Victoria, we have a First Peoples Direction Circle who also strongly informs and drives our initiatives. And some exciting thing happens when you have a collective of community voices driving you as a singular blackfellow working in government. You feel you've got, I think every day when I'm breathing and I'm walking, I can feel my ancestors, or 500,000 of them for the last 60,000 years walking behind me. But even when you've got them living ones behind you, it makes you thrive and be more impactful and powerful in what you're asking government to do. And that's the other thing. We don't work for government as blackfellas. We're working for our community. Government are paying us, but we're always working to our community. So I think that's a really exciting way that we approach relations and bringing information back into informing the way government should work. The First Peoples Direction Circle, you know, our mob are savvy now. They learnt you white fellas' ways. We went to university and we're ahead of the game. You know, I mentioned before about our pitch and some background work we've been doing from the moment we knew MAPCO was transitioning and there was this whole precinct getting built. The First Peoples Direction Circle immediately went, fuck yeah, let's get a business case. That's what them white people want. They want a business case. So we got money and we got a preliminary business case done up and consulted with the Bidri and all our First Peoples-led organisations to have a look at what needed to be in that space. We looked at locations. We weren't just locked into the Melbourne's Arts Precinct. We're looking at corridors that go out which are accessible to our community. But at the end of the day, how can you not want to have yourself seen? How could you as a society living here in Victoria not want to see a First Peoples led space right in the Melbourne Arts Precinct where we get seen, the kids from this state get seen. They start to believe that they can enact change through the arts, because that is a way that we enact change, is with our voice in the arts. So I think we're getting really mindful of what we need to do before we come to you fellas and talk. We're now at the stage where we need some money. So anyone in here that has relationships with philanthropics, you know, I think our mob is starting to realise we need to turn to philanthropics, but it's not something we're quite good at. We don't know how to match with them. We don't know yet what's the cherry they want at the end. So I hope from this, people who have those relationships with private investors or philanthropics, whatever you want to call them, is something that you can be generous in sharing with our organisations, our mobs, in not just in how to fight for initiatives or venues or spaces like I'm talking about here, but how to, you know, mentor us up in sustainability of our businesses so we can eventually become less dependent on government funds. So I think that's a real moment of thrivance. We're looking at things differently. We're refusing to be pigeonholed and look at things from a deficit anymore, and I think that's really exciting. And our young people are watching this too, and they're getting confident. And so we did speak a lot from a place of deficit in the 80s and 90s growing up. As now I try and speak more positively of like, it's mine and I own it and I deserve it and we want it, and give it.
Not even give it, I'm taking it. Thank you so much. This connects a bit with some of the yarns we were having with you, Robyn, about shifting models of excellence in the institution and in different creative spaces, and shifting what we understand as being excellent and as as requiring funding, you know, not just as a you know, a band-aid solution, but also as a protective factor for cultural safety and thrivance and all of these amazing things that Sarah was just speaking to. Maybe reflecting on that, but maybe not. Maybe just sharing what you think people in the room should know that, you know, you have learnt and have done, you know, the work to learn, and what are some things you would like perhaps some people in the audience to be learning too.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I just want to reiterate this idea about philanthropics. I think it's absolutely critical. All the work we do that's got any longevity is supported by strong philanthropic support. And what's really interesting is that group more than any other want to learn. So there's, I think, in terms of what thrives, I think that is a sector that it not only thrives, it also nurtures. It nurtures the people who are engaged in the giving, and it nurtures our ability to do something. It nurtures our community partners and people we work with, you know, and not necessarily community individuals as well. So I think it's absolutely critical, because government funding, like when we're talking about opportunity, what's the big opportunity? Big opportunities for government to start getting it fucking right? Like that has just not happened yet. And the arts sector is absolutely at the core of that, because in the arts, it brings the holistic nature of culture and identity together in a way that medicine comes in and it's the body and it might be the mind, but generally they're separate. You know, housing, engineering, all of this, which gets more money than the arts, sits to one side of what really a human being is, right? It's the embodiment of someone's culture and their identity. And if you get that right, then you can tend to get everything else right. It falls down from that. But where are the enablers for that? The enablers are siloed. It's philanthropy, I think, that understands that there can be kind of multi-layered and multi-factored way of doing things that then subvert this government and institution way of siloing things in order to, sometimes it's empire building, sometimes it's just ease of narrative. But there's such an opportunity to get it right, and I think the models are there. And I think, you know, getting back to what Sarah said, philanthropy is such a critical part of this. And the other reason it is, and why it's been so valuable for us, is that often philanthropists are the best connected people in community and talking to government too, you know? Like they really have opened the doors in terms of you want to get to someone who, you know, might be interested but it's not on your radar, is not going to open the door to you if you just knock. But that whole sector is a really interesting sector. And I'm kind of shouting its praises because I think it's labile and active enough to kind of work in a space that can be really complicated, right? But has got such huge rewards for, like, Australia as a nation, individuals within it, communities, just really what we all need at the moment. So I guess, you know, in terms of the organisation and how an organisation, like, you know, I head up a centre at the University of Melbourne. We're about to go for some more philanthropic money, which will see us bigger even. I just got a big ARC laureate grant around community collections. So the kind of layer of that then is the idea that these community collections are assets, and they're knowledge assets, and they're assets for people's future. And they need to be invested in as assets, not as liabilities. So at the moment they're seen as liabilities. Art centres have to produce income. They do that by selling artworks because that's what the market understands. Market understands a painting as a commodity. You sell it, you make money. Money comes back to the art centre. The art centre can then look after the community collection. But the community collection is the thing that is the past and the future of that community, and there is no direct funding for that. So the benefit of having a kind of multi-layered economic system and a faceted knowledge system is it breaks down all of those silos. So I guess the way we operate is we try and break all of that down so that we're not talking to an arts sector, or we're not, talking to an education sector, or we're not talking to an industry sector. We're actually talking across all of that. And for us, that's been a really effective way of operating, because it means we're not speaking for anyone. It means that we acknowledge that we're in the middle of it all, and that we're not the end result and we're not the beginning. So I think it's just, a lot of this I think is about positioning and your partners, and then certain level of, invisibility is the wrong word, right? But like all of what we're doing in cultural preservation, which is a dreadful word, but it's a Eurocentric notion, cultural materials conservation. I prefer cultural nurturing or nurturance. All that we're doing there is for us to get out of the way eventually, because everything will be in place, culture will be strong, culture will continue, culture will be looked after. So it's kind of an exit strategy, I suppose, I'm working on. But, I know it's a long-term one, so it's okay. I'm safe for the next mortgage repayment, I guess. So.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to go over to Sarah Narden for your response next to that question as well. And I know when we were talking, one of the things you wanted to emphasise is that philanthropic success and the success of investment doesn't always look like the completion of a project on its own terms. It can sometimes have new forms of nourishment and success. And I was wondering if in your response you wanted to speak to some of your experiences of seeing what that looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. I have a role called a trust building project manager, and people look at me and think, oh, there's some trust funds here. Let's apply to you for some money. And I'm on the other side, so I know I'm going to apply to you for some money. So with our programs, we have generally run over the last 3 years 88 truth-telling forums run by First Nations, people from the Uruk Commission to artists to, and they're yarns that are led in conversations around authentic leadership, inclusive dialogues, healing historical wounds and diverse collaborations. So part of that program, Uncle Shane has been leading. He invited his nephew Dylan to join us for a year at our centre. We created a cultural residency where Uncle Shane and Dylan could live, and I know Tariki through asking if there was any opportunity that Dylan could come to VCA and study art, because after the referendum, a week later he rang up and said, I'm in the supermarket in Shepparton, 88% of my town voted no in the referendum. I don't know who likes me, who hates me. I don't know where I stand here. I want to study art in Melbourne. So, next day, ringing my architecture buddies, let's get a folio together. We had he took us out in country a few years ago and looked at a silo in Mooroopna, and he said, oh, why is it always the white guys that paint the black guys on the silos? Why aren't I painting those silos? So it was just that reinforcement that my architecture buddies put a montage of his beautiful artwork on the silo to give him that sense of, I can do this. He has a year 10 education. There's all the obstacles happening. He's got a 3-year-old in Shepparton. And just the fact that he had the backing, the opportunity, the option of the door opened at that time to say, hey, we've got you, come study with us. And he said, oh, thank you. But what I've decided on is I want to be a cultural advisor. He learnt how to care for country and has learnt how to jump out of a helicopter in a fire situation. He's learnt how to ride boats on the Barmer Lakes to help with regenerative tourism. He's on a better wage than I am, and I'm so proud of him. So, that's the kind of success marker that I see, that as an architect you also have relational responsibility to develop everyone that comes in your web, and whatever it takes, the privilege is to create that web of success and thrivance. So, yeah, thank you for the question.
Beautiful black excellence. All right, do you want to answer that one? We're going to go to questions in a second too. So what's something that you want people in the room either to know or to go and learn and find out themselves?
I'd like people in the room, if I may make so bold, and I've got a microphone, so I'm gonna. I'd love it if, when we leave this place, I mean, you may have an answer, you may have one in the chamber ready to go now, but to take a moment and think about something that you really want to know. Or what's that thing, perhaps, that you've missed out on? I've worked in intercultural spaces and doing cultural literacy, cultural safety, lateral violence workshops in community organisations out there, professionally now for about 26 years or so. And in that time, in every workshop that I've run, thousands of them, goodness knows how many people I've interacted with in that time, I've heard some variation of the three same responses that have come back every single time when we've talked about engaging with stories of place, with the histories of here, and how we might amplify and elevate those more. And they've been touched on here as well, that people said, yes, it's I totally understand what you're saying, Tirik. I totally get where you're coming from. I'm with you. I want this too. But the thing you have to understand is, I always love it when sentences start with that. It's one of the prefixes of doom. The thing you have to understand is, we don't know. We don't know how to find out. And we couldn't possibly ask because we might offend. And particularly as I've been doing a lot of this with educators for those 26 years or so, that third one that we can't ask because we might offend is the one that has offended me personally the most. That's the thing that offends. Because I found myself asking, who was it that told you couldn't ask? Just for my own edification? And invariably the responses come back with people saying, oh, well, we don't know, but we just know. And so a lot of my work has been about trying to unpack that and understand, because from my elders, the people that dragged me up as a kid, they weren't the people saying, don't look over there, that's not for you, this is not applicable. They were the ones saying, here, come in. We've always had a tradition of welcoming guests here in this country. Let me show you how to interact. And quite often people saying, oh no, sorry, you don't understand, I couldn't possibly, that wouldn't be right. I hope we can all start asking ourselves a bit more what it is that we've missed out on, what has been taken from us. And if we can do that, and my colleagues from around the faculty have heard me talk about this before, and it's certainly very much at the heart of what I believe. I think if we can do that, we're in a position to start developing a bit more of a healthy self-interest in this place. Dare I even say, a healthy level of selfishness to a certain extent, if it's applied appropriately. To be able to turn around and go, shit, I have missed out on that. And I really want to be part of that thing. How do I do it? And what are the stories I'm going to say? Because we can talk about the way that political change is wrought in this country, or the lack thereof. We can talk about how 12 months ago, after we just had a conversation about a referendum, every politician in the country then ran away from this subject because talking about Indigenous anything was just too hard now, and so now we're actually worse off than we have been over the course of the last decade or two. But in fact, it's not in political spheres where change is wrought. And it's not what we it's the conversations, it's that axiological shift about how we talk about the value of things for us that we talk about around the kitchen table with our families of a night time, that we talk about while we're standing in the coffee queue waiting for our latte to be ready. And I think that level of investment and an opportunity to see the strength of an Indigenous voice and Indigenous authority there, but how we can engage with that. You see, I've sat here today There was a lot of conversation in the last session about the changing nature of audiences and the need for our organisations to be able to respond, and I totally get and accept that. But I'd also ask, is there not an opportunity here in our organisations and the way that we engage to think about how we change audiences? And if we're able to start amplifying our values out there into the world and start talking about what it is that's important, how do we connect? And what does it make? What audiences are we not even speaking to because we are not safe places, or we're not perceived as safe places for them to come? I can't remember all three of my words at the start when we were choosing words to describe the space around us here in MAPCO, but one of them was unseen, another one was white. What was my third one? You took the phone from me then.
Heterotopia.
That was heterotopia, that was just true also. And I don't want anyone to think, so we've broken Leah now. I don't want anyone to actually, to view this in an overtly negative light, because these are all opportunities for us to start talking about what it is that we want to move towards. I walk these spaces every single day. It's my job. I don't normally dress like this when I'm going about my day-to-day life, and I'm not normally measured in the way that I speak. I'm normally shouting at 4 children who run madly around the place. Evelyn's only ever seen this version.
Literally only seen this fella in a suit.
I know. It's so weird, but I love that I live like that in your head. But growing up, these weren't the places that I saw myself. My father was an artist. I was dragged through the NGV, all these sorts of other places, always feeling like I was out of place. Even when it was my family's paintings on the wall, my family's stories moving through that space. And so I wonder, and I'm sorry, I realise I've talked a lot and I'm going to wind it up in the next 30 seconds, but I wonder what might it be like if we started thinking about what our spaces could be, and what is the tremendous privilege and the power that we have to start changing the way that we interact. And I don't think it's necessarily just about programming. I don't think it's necessarily just about how we present stories to the world. I think it's about how we show the work that we are doing and how we show the value. As I say, there's an axiological shift that takes place, how we start talking about how we value things differently and how we can speak with joy and strength and yearning about what we want to build. This is why I love this word thrivance, because my culture, my practice is not in a state of reclamation or restoration. It's not even in a state of maintenance. It is in a state of continual thrivance. It thrives because of the aunties that taught people to weave in darkened rooms with the doors locked and the windows covered so that no one would see. It thrives in the young people that danced on the stages here at Worth's Olympia, and in the stories that we continue to tell to our young people growing up. When I went to school, I was told that Aboriginal people in the southeast of this continent were extinct. That was the language that was used. I'm very pleased to be able to stand on numerous platforms and talk about just how wrong they were. Mr. Thompson's history class was lovely, but it was very incorrect. There's great joy and strength to be had. And I think if we can move away from that deficit space and start actually saying, my God, there's so much here for me, it moves us forward a hell of a lot faster than if we're trying to talk about compliance and doing things because they're the right thing to do. I'm done.
Good.
Mic drop, except don't drop the mics. They're very expensive. Sarah.
I just wanted to add what my 3 words were, because it was coming from the place of thrivance, and it's what I see MAPCO or a site of significance in the city. If it's not in the Melbourne Arts Precinct, I think that would be a real shame, and really for you fellas not to, for the Victoria to not take credit and the pride of the uniqueness of First Peoples down here that's part of this state's identity. And we heard the term before about competing stakeholders. I refuse to be a competing stakeholder. First people's first. It's going to happen. We're going to have a space in the city. It's going to hold, and it's going to be a place for our black organisations. It's going to be a place that we can profit off. It's going to be a place like when you go to Canada, you see black Aboriginal mob have buildings over there. They have incubation spots. It's going to happen. So I put the words up: black, belonging, and it's going to be culturally safe. We're going to have aunties coming out picking from that flora and fauna that Auntie Gail has planted there and weaving with that. And it's going to be a space for our kids that may not even have an interest in the arts but are walking through this new parklands down there, going to feel culturally safe. They're not going to feel unwanted or threatened by security out the front going, what are you blacks doing here? They're going to feel a sense of belonging because we are going to have a space there.
Yeah.